Welcome and thank you for joining today's session on how to spot a scam. In recent years, we've seen a rise in highly sophisticated crimes, from international Ponzi schemes to locally operated pyramid structures. And with me today, I have Lonnie van der Merwe, who has warned me not to do any bio.
I am Zaima now.
Thanks. Simon, so I guess I don't need to read any bio again.
No. And we are standing in front of our scam wall, which is a visual representation of some of the scams people have fallen for in the past.
You don't have to look too far to have experienced any one of these scams, but we use it as a means to protect ourselves going forward.
This is why financial advisors are more important than ever. Advisors are the first line of defense for vulnerable clients.
You are in a unique position to recognize warning signs early, ask the right questions, challenge unrealistic promises, and guide clients towards safe and sound financial decisions. Your vigilance can protect not only a client's savings, but their dignity, their financial security, and often their future.
Today's session is all about empowerment for you and for those you serve.
We'll unpack how these schemes operate, explore the red flags, and discuss practical ways both investors and advisors can stay ahead of evolving threats. Because while regulations can help, the strongest defense against fraud will always be an informed, vigilant, and well-equipped advisor.
Let's get started.
That wall looks pretty cool. Lani, how long did that take you to do?
An afternoon of arts and crafts.
Well, as things evolve, we too have evolved, because as cool as the wall may look, we've got some fancy slides that we can present on today.
Yes, I must admit I do prefer PowerPoint over sticky tape and press stick.
Cool. Should we get into it?
Let's get it going. Okay, so this session is all about how to spot a scam or fraud. And if you really think about it, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is.
You know, it's a cliche, but it hits ever so often.
So our focus today is specifically investment scams. I mean, there are a lot more scammers and all of these WhatsApp chats and things going around. Maybe something for a future webinar, but today specifically we are focusing on investment scams. More specifically, fraud, Ponzi schemes, and pyramid schemes. And again, we are going to get to practical examples, but just to make sure that you can almost link the practical example to a technical definition, we are going to spend some time on the definitions of these crimes. So, fraud, firstly, is the unlawful and intentional making of a misrepresentation which causes actual prejudice or which is potentially prejudicial to others. So, again, with fraud, you don't have to prove harm. If the potential for harm was there, then it's still fraud. And then moving on to a Ponzi scheme, it's an unlawful investment arrangement where returns are paid to existing investors from funds contributed by new investors rather than from legitimate profits. So in a Ponzi, there's almost never a real investment behind the scheme, and it's just your new investors are paying off older investors. And because people are getting money, people tend to continue to fall for these Ponzi schemes. And then lastly, we've got a pyramid scheme, which is an unlawful business model where participants earn primarily by recruiting others. And here the returns funded by entry payments, and there's usually no genuine economic activity.
Yeah, I think, it's important to highlight that every time you think you can spot one of these crimes or frauds or schemes, people just get better at hiding it. So it has become increasingly difficult to spot, but I suppose that's why we need to be as alert as possible.
Exactly. It's one of the reasons why we are doing this today, to enable people to see almost the common threads or themes or the red flags with these types of crimes. So we are going to unpack some key characteristics of each of these elements, starting with fraud. And fraud specifically usually involves false promises of high returns, often advertised as guaranteed or risk-free, or delivering unrealistically high profits in a short time. And we know real investments involve risk and volatility. I'm not saying that all guaranteed products or risk-free products are fraud, but if it's a combination of a very, very high, maybe even double-digit return that is guaranteed and risk-free, and you get it within 15 seconds after you made an investment, you need to start to question things.
Yeah, and I suppose that there's only one product in the market that's tax-free.
Yes, and it's because National Treasury said so. Then fraud also targets specific communities, sometimes religious or cultural or professional, and unfortunately uses trust within this group to gain credibility. So it might happen that one specific person within the group fell for the fraud, and then they go and tell their friends and family or other people involved, and then the circle becomes bigger. There's usually a lack of transparency or vague or confusing explanations of the investment, no clear paper trail, and it can involve fake companies, forged documents, or misused funds. And if you think about it, fake documents and those type of things, that's clear fraud. So they make up things that don't exist. And again, I don't know, people don't want to hear about FICA today, but I can't help it.
You had to throw it in there.
Yes,
I was just waiting for it.
The video's on YouTube. You can go and watch it. But if you think about it, just being a little bit stricter with FICA, checking the watermarks, making sure that the documents you get are legitimate documents, you can try and see through the fraud as well. And then fraud also involves complex or secretive strategies. They use jargon to confuse or to impress, big words, and there's usually claims of proprietary algorithms or insider access, and that's why they can't give you the whole truth. But also remember, insider trading is a crime. So the moment they start talking about people they know or things they know, then it might be fraud or it might be insider trading, so just be cautious. Then if we move on to a Ponzi scheme and the key characteristics there, firstly, again, promises of high returns with little or no risk. And again, investments we know involve risk. We can't take the risk out of it. So the moment people start to guarantee things and say you'll definitely get your money, you definitely need to start to question them. And the returns here, unfortunately, are paid from new investors' money and not actual profits. The promoters are secretive about the business model, so you won't necessarily know your money's coming from new investors and not the real product. They often use fake credential or references. So again, trust but verify. If they tell you things, Google and even all the AI capabilities out there might actually be to our benefit here to just go and double check things. Early investors may receive returns to build trust, but the scheme eventually collapses. And again, I don't know why they do this, and people unfortunately fall for it, but there's potentially a request for payment of fees to receive money. And we all know legitimate financial services businesses and products, they won't ask you for fees before you receive your money back. You might have to be FICA'd again, and I can't help but chuck it in everywhere. But there's no request for payment of fees to receive your money.
Yeah, so I suppose the easy one here is, probably you're going to love what I'm saying now, is regulation. Anything regulated has specific reporting structures that can easily be traced back. So often we look for get-rich schemes, but I suppose if it was that easy to get rich, then there'll be no poverty in the world.
Exactly. It's the same with all the diet products they sell out there. But also, and you touched on it, but how you know that something is safer is regulated products. The regulators force us to say that you cannot guarantee no risk. There is a little bit of risk and volatility involved everywhere, and if people start to promise these things, just question it. So there is a little bit of a way to remember how a Ponzi works, and it's called rob Peter to pay Paul. So Paul might have been the first investor, and now we're taking money from Peter, not putting it in a legitimate investment, and we use it to pay Paul. Moving on to a pyramid scheme. So here, again, to build your pyramid, you require participants to recruit others to earn returns. So the more money you want to make, the more people you need to make the money. It often involves membership tiers, so silver or gold or platinum or super double gold. There's no legitimate... Yes. And you want to have the highest tier, so obviously people then go and recruit more people. There's usually no legitimate product or service being sold. it could be disguised as stokvels or crypto investments or forex trading. And again, I'm not saying all stokvels or crypto or forex is pyramids, but unfortunately those products are abused by the guys who run the pyramid schemes. And then they also use social media and encrypted messaging apps to avoid detection. So if people are trying to sell you stuff over social media, just think twice. And here it's more recruit Peter to pay Paul. So the more people you have, the more money comes in, and then you can pay your first investors. And then we need to ask ourselves, and again, it is the focus today, is why do people continue to fall for scams? And this is actually a quote from one of the first scams in South Africa, the court case there, but the judge said a combination of greed and gullibility. So some people just want more money and they are greedy and they tend to fall for this, and they're almost so greedy that they don't see the red flags. And some people are just gullible or just good trusting people. So we'll see on a lot of these instances, but pensioners tend to fall for it because they trust the people who tell them the things, and they want their money to last longer, and then they hope that it's true. But unfortunately, good people are being abused by bad people. So we are going to unpack a few case studies, very high level, just sort of to give you an introduction on how people fell for it and what the results of these scams were. So we traced it back to the early 1980s, so before some of us were even born. And the first scheme in South Africa was called the fraud milk scheme, and we'll explain a bit later. But yeah, you can see from this slide, from the early 1980s through to 2025, and I dare say we don't even know what the future holds in. But again, the aim of today is almost to show you what people have done in the past, how people tend to fall for the same thing over and over again, and again, just to help you identify the red flags so that the next one is not a problem.
Yeah, so, I think what the slide highlights is just the evolution of these schemes through time. So it's almost gone in line with the changes, whether it be a technology point of view, from a regulatory point of view. There's just always a new way or a new loophole that's being found. So you've got to stay on your toes at all times.
So starting with the first publicized scam in South Africa, 1984, ironically enough, the year I was born. And so there were a few scams that followed the same recipe. The first was the Kiba scheme, and Adrian Nieuwoud was responsible for that one. Then we had JP Botha and the Trio Cultura scheme and a few others. So the modus operandi of these schemes were that participants were sold milk culture kits and promised high returns by growing and sending back the culture to the companies. So it was this white powder thing that people were told to put into milk. It started to ferment, and it's why they called this fraud milk, because it was literally sour milk. Then they were told to dry it, grind it up in powder form, and then put it in envelopes and post it back. So you can see, as you mentioned, where technology was in the early 80s. But yeah, a lot of people fell for it. The schemes relied on continuous recruitment of new participants to sustain payouts. And after we've done the characteristics, I think you can start to identify these. And thousands of investors believed that it was a legitimate home-based business. So almost the first work-from-home model. The outcome here, unfortunately, wasn't that great. So thousands of South Africans lost a lot of money, approximately 150 million back in the 80s. Some even lost their life savings and pension. And I think 150 million back in the 80s is about 2.3 billion today.
I think it could be a little bit more depending on where it was actually invested.
Yes, and the math with inflation.
Yeah, it's shocking. I mean, 84, 150 million would have raised a few eyebrows.
Exactly. So these schemes did identify gaps in the legal framework, because the only thing that the law enforcement agencies could do here is declare them as illegal lotteries. So back in the 80s, gambling was still a crime. So by declaring it an illegal lottery, they could shut it down. And then sequestration and liquidation of the promoters put a stop to these schemes. And there you could see some of the old 1980s artwork. And again, It was the first time these were publicized in the newspapers. So before then, I think some scams did happen, but it was usually just localized. But this was the first one that took the entire country, unfortunately, as victims, but it also created a lot of sensation. The sad fact is people didn't learn from these first scams because, Master Bond followed in the 80s.
So we move on to master bonds. I mean, it's quite interesting because I had to do some research on something that happened before I was born. Well, a good couple of years before I was born, in fact. So let's just do a little bit of a deep dive into it, because I think it's really important, because as we all know, the devil is in the detail. So this is quite interesting. The modus operandi. So master bond property holdings attracted 1 billion by offering a combination of security and high interest rates. More than 90% of that money was used within the project for high speculative long-term projects, which generated little or no return. The group collapsed and thousands of investors were left destitute, many of them pensioners. I think, this is a common trend. It's pensioners. Like, it's sad. It's just sad that happens to the most vulnerable. The scheme involved intentional misrepresentation, including selling shares in non-existent assets, falsifying financial results, and promotional material. Misuse of investor funds. I think misuse of investor funds is a big thing here, because there was no track record back in the day. While it did strictly follow a Ponzi model, paying old investors with new investor money, it did rely on continuous inflows to sustain operations, which collapsed when inflows slowed. The outcome: criminal convictions and legislative changes. Cool, so let's take a deeper dive into it. In the early 1980s, so we call this the formation and growth phase. In 1983, Masterbond started offering high yield investments, primarily through an unsecured debenture structure. Aggressive marketing, promising returns of up to 21%. 21%.
Double digits.
Yeah. And obviously, it attracted thousands of investors, many who, again, were elderly pensioners.
Yeah, but who wouldn't want
21%
returns?
In the late 1980s, so we call this phase the expansion and risk phase. And this one is a bit more tricky. It's not as easy to spot, because if you look at the structure, Masterbond expanded into property development, investing in projects like Club Mykonos, Fancott, Silverhurst, and Marina Martinique. So when you look at those names,
they still exist.
They still exist. So back in the day when this arose, we didn't have a WhatsApp chat or social media, Google telling you these things. So it appeared to be legitimate, and it made it difficult back in the day. So it was a simple mismatch between developed short-term investor borrowings and long-term property investment, creating liquidity risks. So that was just managing the raising and deployment of capital and the actual timeline between the two. In 1991, we call that the collapse. By October 1991, Masterbond applied for liquidation. Around 20,000 investors had invested approximately 605 million. The collapse was triggered by unsustainable financial practices and alleged fraudulent activities, including selling shares in non-existent properties. So non-existent properties, obviously that should raise. It's fraud. Unfortunately, we didn't have your favorite regulatory requirements in place there.
FICA is a mitigant for fraud. I'm going to say it again.
In 1995, finally we get criminal convictions. Directors Johannes Winkler, Koos Jonker, Nicolas Brits were convicted of 7 counts of fraud involving 129 million and sentenced to prison for 32 years. So, did they serve that? No, they served an effective 10 years and since have been released on parole. So that's interesting as well, and it kind of frustrates me because, you get away with this, with serving 1/3 of your sentence. But I mean, you didn't stop there. Shalani, I'm going to leave the legal jargon to you.
Okay, so in 1997, we had a Nell Commission of Inquiry. It was called the Nell Commission because it was led by Judge Henny Nell, and the inquiry was created and he was appointed to investigate the collapse of Masterbond. So again, it was such a big event in South Africa, and the scale of the damage was so profound that the Commission had to try and find out why it happened and how to fix it. So the Commission found serious deficiencies in the Companies Act, lack of fraud prosecution mechanisms. So again, it's why the sentencing wasn't as long as we would have hoped. Absence of class action remedies, and then poor regulation of financial intermediaries. So following the Nell Commission, there was a period of curatorship and recovery for the Masterbond companies. So curators were appointed by the Cape High Court, and they managed to recover or restructure at least 503 million. So 83% of the invested funds, which is a little bit of a silver lining. And they also recovered 50 million in mortgage interest. The only unresolved project for a long time was Marina Martinique, and that was hindered by a silted up harbour and liquidation of the developer. But ultimately, by 2005, and I mean from the early 1980s to 2005, it's a long period, 14 years. So by 2005, the Cape High Court officially ended the curatorship, and that marked the formal closure of the Masterbond saga. So let's move on to the Creon scheme. It stretched from 1988 to 2002, and it's a classical Ponzi scheme operated by a crime family with Mariki Prinsloo as the matriarch. Over 1.5 billion was invested in the scheme, and capital from new investors was at all times used to pay exorbitant interest rates to existing investors. There was never any underlying business nothing to justify the interest rates of 10% per month.
Yeah, 10% per month. Obviously, I mean, who wouldn't want 10% per month? You don't need to work.
Yes. The outcome was Prinsloo and her family members were convicted on multiple charges. So going into the detail of Creon, so it initially was founded, and the early operations was between 1988 and 1998, so a good 10-year stretch. The scheme began informally and was later formalized under the name Finsure Consultants, later rebranded as MP Finance CC. The scheme promised returns of initially 20% per month, and it was later adjusted to 10%, attracting thousands of investors, especially in the Fold Triangle.
So from 240% to 120% per annum. That's not bad.
It's still high numbers, yes. Okay, so 1998 to 2002, expansion and further deception. Creon operated through multiple entities, including Creon Financial Services, Maatbird Financial Services, and Medical 20, to obscure its activities from regulators. So multiple names trying to fly below the regulatory radar. The scheme relied on new investor funds to pay existing investors, so a classic Ponzi. And by 2002, the scheme had attracted 1.5 billion in investments. By May 2002, collapse and arrest happened. So the scheme officially collapsed in 2002 due to a combination of regulatory intervention, unsustainable finance practices, and growing public scrutiny. And this resulted in reduced new investments, and obviously because it's a Ponzi, if there's no new investments, then there can't be payouts, and then the whole scheme collapsed. The trial was quite quick, so under normal circumstances these types of trials take a long time, but in this instance 2009 to 10. So the trial began in July 2009 in the North Gauteng High Court. On 8 June, less than a year later, 2010, Prinsloo and 5 other family members were convicted on hundreds of counts of fraud, theft, and operating a harmful business practice, as well as racketeering under POCA. So if you can still remember, it's wonderful how the Easter eggs pop up. But yeah, if you remember the FICA session, this is actually that in real life.
Well, I hope everyone out there joined the last session. Yeah, so...
If you didn't, check the video on YouTube.
But more importantly, Everything is connected.
It is, and this just demonstrates that. So by 2015, so obviously they were convicted and found guilty in 2010, and then the long appeal process started. But by 2015, the Supreme Court of Appeal upheld most of the convictions, and the court found the scheme constituted a pattern of racketeering under POCA. And Mariki and her family members were sentenced, multiple convictions, but the sentences ranged between 5 to 25 years in prison. And this brings us to Shemax.
Yeah, so I mean, this is quite interesting in history as well of financial services, because I think it's also a bit closer to home. I'm sure everyone on the call has had some sort of experience, be it a friend, a family member, or in some cases given advice on it or been caught out by that. So, you know, the important thing to note, and as we go and do a deeper dive into this, is it's not only the actual directors or the actual schemers that can get in trouble. This was the first time where we actually saw those who actually sold and marketed the product take the brunt
of the regulatory whip on this one, yes. So the modus operandi on this one is it was run like a property syndication scheme, which again in itself wasn't illegal necessarily, but how they did it got them into trouble. So this specific one collected money from the public to invest in property. Its funding model, however, was found to contravene the Banks Act, as it effectively operated like a deposit-taking institution without a banking license. The scheme promised high returns, and investigation found that it often paid from new investor contributions rather than from actual profits, resembling a Ponzi scheme. The SARB intervened in 2010, issuing directives for Shemax to repay investors and appointing statutory managers to oversee its assets. The ultimate outcome was that the scheme collapsed, and it left around 18,700 investors at the risk of losing their money. The Nova Property Group was created as a rescue vehicle to repay investors over a 10-year period, but this also unfortunately failed to do so by the 2022 deadline.
As you look at the actual structure of it, from 1998 to 2010, formation and growth, Shemax Investments Pty Ltd was established in the late 1990s and promoted proper syndication schemes to retail investors. So I think it was the first in its kind for direct retail investors through this structure. Investors were promised high returns through investments in commercial property developments like the Villa Retail Park and Zambezi Retail Park. You know, when you talk about these buildings, it's not so far that you need to drive from Joburg to actually have a look at that mall that still stands exactly as the picture depicts. So, I mean, it's scary, especially for those that have, you know, invested and put their life savings and pensions to drive past.
It must be horrible because it's a constant reminder of the magnitude of this scam.
Yeah, and it's very much visible. You can't miss it if you're driving past it. You really can't. So by 2010, Shemax had raised approximately 4.6 billion. So there's 18,700 investors, 4.6 billion.
It's a lot of money.
It's substantial, depending on who the investor is, of course, but it's still a substantial investment. September 2010, regulatory intervention. SARB issued a directive for declaring Shemax funding model to be in contravention to the Banks Act. The SARB ordered Shemax to cease operations and repay investors. This is what triggered the collapse of the scheme, as the company could not meet its obligations. I mean, obviously because of the structure and the returns promised, I think at that time in a quarterly basis as well, it made it a bit difficult for them to meet those requirements. Important to note as well, despite the scale of the collapse, the NPA declined to prosecute any of the individuals. I think that's quite powerful and quite scary as well. Attempts to hold Shemax directors personally liable were unsuccessful.
So the most important to note here is that numerous civil claims were brought against financial advisors who recommended Shemax investments. So unfortunately, the people behind the scheme were never prosecuted. Attempts to hold those directors personally liable in civil claims, also unsuccessful. But the financial advisors who provided advice, who told people to go and invest into ShareMax, they were unfortunately held up and held accountable. So civil claims in court, ombud cases, a lot of these examples where I think the reminder here is that as a financial advisor, if you unfortunately fall for the scheme and you advise your clients to invest in it, then you are liable for the bad advice.
So this was obviously the first of its kind, and it also shaped regulations.
Then we're moving on to the PSC guarantee growth scam. So
I think without even going too much into it, it's not hard to spot how people could have been confused with the wording.
That too, and if you look at it, 13.8% in less than a month. So this is a little, they at the time they said they even beat unit trusts, but people should have asked why. Because again, back to that first slide, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is.
Yeah, but 13.8% in a month, or less than, even better, less than a month. Yeah, that should be raising some sort of alarm bell.
True. And again, this brings us back to those slides where we mentioned sort of some of the key characteristics. So you can see how they pop up everywhere. So from 2000, the early 2000s to 2010, the scheme ran. So the modus operandi was it functioned like an unlisted investment company, promising high annual returns, even in less than a month. The company was structured in a way to avoid the restrictions of the then Stock Exchange Act, the Unit Trust Control Act that turned into Cisco, and the FSB back in the day, now the FSCA requirements.
Always a loophole, eh?
Always a loophole, and they found them. So the outcome was that the FSB and SAPS investigated the scheme, leading to criminal charges. Approximately 160 million was lost by about 3,000 investors.
Yeah, so I suppose with what we've been going through so far, the common trend is they don't last as long. So yes, the trial may last long, but the actual Ponzi or the pyramid doesn't last too long before they found out.
At some point they lose the momentum, yes. So from 1998 to 2000, foundation and setup. So Jack Milner, the founder of the Progressive Systems College, or PSC, gained public attention after winning an investment competition. He used his reputation then to launch the PSC Guaranteed, it's all in the name, Growth Limited Fund, an investment fund underwritten by Tygon, who was a JSE-listed financial services company led by Gary Porritt, and Sue Bennett was a director of both PSCGG and Tygon, and she was also closely involved in the fund setup. So between 2000 and 2002, they started with fraudulent promotion and fundraising. So the PSCGG was marketed as a low-risk, high-return investment vehicle. The prospectus misrepresented how funds would be invested, claiming diversification and professional management, but in reality, the funds were immediately transferred to EBN Trading, a company under Porritt's control, and invested in only two entities, Tygon and Shell, both controlled by Porritt. By 2002, the collapse happened. And then this has been one of the longest standing court cases because it's still going on. So PSCGG collapsed, Porritt, Milner and Bennett were arrested. Milner immediately pleaded guilty and served only 11 months of a 5-year sentence. But Porritt and Bennett's trial has involved over 3,000 charges, including fraud, racketeering and contravention of the Companies Act and the Exchange Control Regulations. The trial's been delayed for over 2 decades due to multiple legal applications by the accused parties. I think the only people who won here is the lawyers who are for the last 2 decades have been making legal fees. The case is still ongoing, and it's one of the longest running financial fraud trials in South African history. So there is no outcome here yet because we're still waiting to see what's happening to Porritt and Bennett, but Mulder served 12 months in jail. So now we're moving on to Abante Capital, or the RVAF Trust Scheme, which operated from 2004 to 2020. So modus operandi. And like I mentioned, this is religious affinity fraud because the Relative Value Arbitrage Fund, or RVAF Trust, formed part of the Abante Group, and it was run by Herman Pretorius, who was seen as a respected community figure active in church circles. a note for charitable donations. He promised unsustainable returns to investors and operated the scheme unilaterally, excluding co-trustees and violating the trust deed. So again, if people start to break the rules, then red flag.
Yeah, but I suppose for the actual investor, they wouldn't really know all of this until it comes to light.
Or if they ask questions, this is why we say don't just take stuff on face value. You need to trust but verify. So the scheme collapsed in July 2012 after Pretorius murdered his business partner Julian Williams and then committed suicide. The outcome was the trust was provisionally sequestrated, revealing liabilities in over 3.1 billion. Investors lost an estimated 2.2 billion with only a fraction recovered. The case led to increased scrutiny of unregulated investment schemes and called for stronger oversight of trust structures. So going into the detail a little bit, so between 2004 and 2012, the RVAF Trust was marketed, like I said, as a low-risk, high-return investment fund, and investors were recruited through a network of advisors. So again, you can see the red flags from the things we mentioned previously. And again, many of those investors were incentivized with commissions. So the fund operated as almost a pyramid within a Ponzi. Pyramid because they required recruitment, and then the Ponzi because they used new investor contributions to pay returns to earlier investors. There was no legitimate investment activity. Financial statements and performance reports were fabricated, which is another word for fraud. So you can see how they interconnected. And Pretorius maintained control over the fund with no independent oversight, violating trust law and fiduciary standards.
So basically saying it's not just FICA, everything is connected in everything.
If there was a rule, he broke it.
Yeah.
So, Trust Property Control Act, all of those requirements, I think he just decided to ignore it. Fabricating performance reports and financial statements. It was just a nest of a lot of contraventions of everything and anything possible. So between 2012 and 2020, the legal fallout happened. So the Western Cape High Court granted a provisional sequestration order in 2012. Trustees sued brokers who had introduced investors to the scheme, claiming unjust enrichment and disposition without value. So you can see how Masterbond opened the door to hold financial advisors or brokers responsible for the advice that they gave. But in this instance, they even tried to claw back the commission that they got. So we mentioned that they were almost enticed and recruited with commissions. And in this case, the trustees then tried to claw back the commission they received based on unjust enrichment arguments. And then Pretorius's dual image, so sort of the good side where he's a community benefactor, and the bad side now where he's a financial fraudster, has become a cautionary tale about affinity fraud and unchecked trust. And that's what I said, it's usually people within church circles or people who know people. You tend to want to trust the people you grew up with or you know from school. And again, I'm not saying you're not allowed to trust the people around you, but when money is involved, always just, and we're going to unpack it later in the slides, but just unpack it a little bit. Ask the questions and be on the lookout for those red flags.
Yeah, so I think it's also important to note that although we're touching on specific scams here, there are lots of scams which we just don't have the time to touch on, and especially in this environment. So, it's sad, but it's the reality. So you just need to be a little bit more alert, because there's a lot that we haven't even touched on.
So moving to Barry Tannenbaum.
Yeah, so I think with this year as well, this was probably a little bit more difficult. I mean, that would also talk to the people who are actually caught within the scheme. Barry Tannenbaum was actually from a pharmaceutical company. So it made it a lot easier for him to get away with this. So let's just go into the modus of operandi, and then we can have a bit of a discussion on it, because this one scared me. Pharmaceutical import investment fraud. 880 investors, including prominent business people in South Africa, Australia, and Europe. So it wasn't just South Africans getting caught. it was your first world countries like Australia and Europe also getting tied in. And it wasn't just your influential business people, it was influential people within the country as well. And the outcome of it was scheme collapsed, years of legal battles. 2005 to 2009 saw the formation and operation of the scheme. So Barry Tannenbaum, heir to the Adcock Ingram pharmaceutical empire, launched a scheme offering 200% annual returns to investors.
It's not even just double digits. He went.
It's scary, but I suppose everyone would have believed him, because who didn't like to use Ingram's cream back in the day?
But it also talks to the time. So in the early 2000s, antiretrovirals, and I mean,
it was a big thing.
It was a big thing.
It was a big need.
It was a big need, and now he turned sort of helping people who needed help into victims too, because he said that the scheme claimed to fund the import of ingredients for antiretrovirals, but no such business existed. So he almost turned HIV
into a Ponzi.
Into a Ponzi, which there's
playing on the most vulnerable again.
It's
so,
next level criminal.
Not pensioners this time, but again, vulnerable people who need it. So he managed to get 880 investors, including top South African business figures, that were duped into investing more than 12.5 billion.
Yeah.
It's scary. 12.5 billion. In June 2009, collapse in exposure. The scheme collapsed when Franklin International, the supposed importer, failed to pay investors. This is a scary one as well. Finance Minister Pravin Gordhan confirmed the scale of the fraud, calling it the largest financial scam in South African history. Largest financial scam. Obviously, Barry fled to Australia. He was never extradited and has no convictions in SA year to date. I think that is probably more scary. I mean,
that he got away with
12.5 billion,
yes.
Biggest scam, and he was able to flee the country.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. Yeah, it's apparently now either Uber or Bolt or one of those rental car drivers in Australia, if you can believe what you read in the news.
We know we can't.
So this brings us to BHI Trust. This one operated from 2008 to 2023, modus operandi. So the scam was orchestrated by trustee Craig Warrener, who began the scam in 2008 with unsuspecting investors buying large amounts of money into the scheme after they were promised returns of over 10%. So while the scheme received about 2.9 billion from investors, only 580 was found to have been invested in a genuine fund, with the remaining amount held in a money market account used to pay high returns to early investors. So Craig was sentenced to an effective 25 years in jail, and then the court-appointed trustees unfortunately only recovered about 100 million in assets. So again, it's unfortunate that people get away with these type of things. So a little bit of the detail here. So Craig, a self-proclaimed expert day trader, created the BHI Trust around 2008 when the financial crisis hit. So again, people were desperate, the crisis happened, and he almost exploited another vulnerability, and it was investor anxiety. So the scheme targeted high net worth individuals, pensioners again, and retirees, and also clients seeking tax-free returns. So the promises including consistent monthly returns, no tax reporting, and again, when people, SARS is the one place you don't sort of mess with. So if you say there's no tax reporting, then you need to start to ask questions. And he also provided exclusive access to elite strategies. So
so I think if you look at that there, it's saying clients seeking tax-free returns, and on the other hand, it says no tax reporting. So that doesn't make sense. If it's tax-free, tax reporting shouldn't even be mentioned there.
Yes. By 2003, the scheme collapsed. So the FSCA began investigating the scheme in 2020, and ultimately the scheme collapsed in 2023. Warrener surrendered, and he was sentenced to 530 Yeah,
537 years, eh? At least we got a conviction in this one.
but it's like, if you think about the magnitude here, 537 years on 207 counts of fraud. Unfortunately, these sentences are running concurrently, so it means effectively it's a 25-year sentence, but that's still a very long time. So criminal proceedings are ongoing against other enablers. And this brings us to Platinum Forex, which ran from 2009 to 2025.
Yeah, so this was also quite interesting as well. A bit sad, a bit frustrating that this was used in the way it was. So let's just go into the detail a bit more. So the modus of operandi, the scheme was marked as a forex trading investment. I think important to note was not a registered FSP or bank. And they again promised monthly returns, of between 2 and 8% and guaranteed capital repayment. Falsified statements showed annual growth of 24 to 94%. 24 to 94% growth in a year. Jeez. Misleading investors into believing that their money was growing. So, I mean, the piece of paper is probably the easiest thing for anyone to doctorate. If you're not actually looking, or you don't have sight of the actual financials or actual system, it's very hard. It's easy to, you can say you're getting 200% or 300% return if you're just printing or generating a piece of paper.
But for me, the most unfortunate bit was that Pastor Colin Davids used his religious influence to gain trust. So who would not trust the pastor if he tells you there's a 24 to 94% growth? And then, unfortunately, also church gatherings were sometimes used to recruit investors. And he blended faith with finance. So the funds from new investors were used to pay returns to early investors. Classic Ponzi, unfortunately.
Yeah, so I suppose it doesn't even, yes, in this case, you've used religious means to gain the following, but also very easy to follow the typical braai conversation and get caught in the middle of these schemes as well.
So fortunately, the outcome here was criminal convictions and confiscation orders. So
just a bit of detail on it as well. So 2009 to 2015 saw the formation and operation of the scheme. Pastor Colin Davids and Daring Bredenkamp solicit investments through Platinum Forex CC by promising high monthly returns. And there again, the word guaranteed being used loosely, capital repayment. Investors are misled by falsified statements showing annual growth of up to 94%. Of the 329 million invested, only 87 million is actually used for forex trading. So there again.
The rest was used to pay early investors or fund personal expenses like luxury homes, shopping and cars.
Yeah, in 2015, collapse and exposure. So the Western Cape High Court grants a preservation order to freeze the assets of Platinum Forex and Davids. Hawks Financial, there.
Fika pops up everywhere.
You were just waiting for that one,
Yes.
Bonnie. Yeah, so Financial Intelligence Center and police began full-scale investigation. The other element that also sparked the investigation was victims began reporting severe financial losses, including lost pensions, etc. So there again, it's the same vulnerable pensioners. In 2015 to 2025, legal proceedings proceeded in a decade. So there again,
Long time.
it's a very long time. 6 years for the actual scheming and 10 years for the
The
trial.
court case.
So a decade-long case unfolds, marked by delays and complex forensic investigations. Davids and Bredenkamp are charged with 56 counts of fraud, money laundering, contraventions of the FASE Act and the Banks Act. So that's interesting. I mean, if you look at the schemes before that, none of them actually had any sort of dealing or any sort of finding from FAIS or FICA or the Banks Act. So, as you mentioned before, everything that happened in the past shaped the way for regulatory requirements moving forward. And we can see how that has actually helped, where we're actually getting convictions with the scams that are happening.
And it's true, because most people think the rules are just there to irritate almost the honest people in the industry. So we have to comply with all the rules. But fortunately, the rules are also used in these instances, and it's clear here where if people continue to break the rules or run Ponzi's and pyramid schemes, then fortunately, the FAIS Act, the Banks Act, those are big sticks that we can use to ensure convictions.
Yeah, so I think the positive here were both Davids and Berenkamp are sentenced to 12 years with 3 years suspended, resulting in 9 years of direct imprisonment. So obviously, for the scale of the crime, I mean, 9 years is not a long time for all those lives.
Except if you think about the conditions in jail, like 9 years is hard.
Well, I wouldn't know that. So, but I mean, like if you look at the actual money that was lost, 9 years doesn't seem like a long time.
No, but I mean, and you're right, 9 years in jail doesn't make up for the amount of money lost by pensioners. And sort of, if you think about it, if you lose half your pension, like how would the rest of your life look? And again, they were unfortunately sort of duped into trusting these people, and they lost their money. I get so upset when I see how people exploit the vulnerable victims.
Yeah, no, it's really sad. Well, at least in the positive year, the confiscation order of approximately 100 million is granted to recover funds for victims. So it's some sort of win for the victims.
It's a third again, so they're not going to get everything back, but a little bit. I don't think it makes up for it, but
no, it doesn't. It doesn't, but
it's something.
It's something, but it's sad.
So moving to BTC Global and the first of the crypto scams. So BTC Global ran from 2017 to 2021. The modus operandi was that the BTC Global fund guaranteed investors a daily return of 2% from a minimum $1,000 investment into Bitcoin. The return could also be scaled the moment the investor referred a new investor to the scheme. So again, I'm hoping people are starting to see those red flags pop up.
But I'm sure, I mean, who wouldn't want a 730% return on $1,000? Jesus.
Sounds too good to be true.
But 730%.
Yes, and above that, investors could also earn a 50% monthly investment profit, subject to a minimum $50,000 investment minimum. So the outcome was obviously the scheme collapse, and the risks inherent to crypto investments were exposed. So if we dive into the detail, and again, this sounds too good to be true, and looking back, and I know hindsight's 2020, but they should have been red flags. So BTC Global was founded by Stephen Twain. His picture, the master traders there in the corner. And he was apparently a Taiwanese Bitcoin master trader.
It doesn't look Taiwanese though.
Yeah, I also don't know if master trader is a qualification or a title, but the fund guaranteed a 2% profit from a minimum R1,000 investment, like I said, and investors were lured with a quick and easy way to grow their capital. So it didn't have a long run. So if you see 2017 to 18 formation operation, but by 2018 it collapsed, where the SAP Serious Commercial Crimes Unit launched an investigation into the fund. BTC Global was suspected of violating FAIS and possibly engaging in fraud, theft, and Ponzi scheme-like behavior. Many victims reported receiving inconsistent payouts before Twain allegedly disappeared in Feb 2018. The problem here is his existence was later questioned, and some people believe that he was a fabricated persona, and to date no evidence could be found that he ever really existed. So that's scary to think the master then didn't exist. Between 2021 and 2025, legal proceedings happened. So SAPS claimed that the company was soliciting investments from the South African public without an actual investment product. And the South Gauteng High Court ruled against the company, concluding that it was a Ponzi. Over 7,000 people were scammed, including people from South Africa, the US, and Australia. Over $80 billion or 1 billion rand was lost in the scam. And like I said, because nobody could ever find Stephen Twain, there are no convictions to date. And this is the problem. So early crypto, before they were accountable institutions, and I keep on bringing FICA in for a reason, but almost the anonymity linked to crypto or Bitcoin in the early days allowed people to get away with this, to create fake personas and to scam people out of a lot of money.
Yeah, but this lasted just 1 year. So it was quick in, quick out, but
Yeah, but a quick
in that short
billion.
space.
Yeah, so maybe the profit was for himself and not for all the people he promised it to. Moving on to Mirror Trading International, and this ran from 2019 to 2025.
Yeah, so there again, another interesting one. So let's just dive into the modus of operandi. SA's largest crypto fraud defrauded investors of 14.7 billion in Bitcoin. So there again, promised returns of 10% monthly. Man,
Too good to be true.
10% monthly. There again, 120% annual return on an investment. Investors receive fabricated statements showing growth, but no real trading occurred. Funds were pooled in accounts and misappropriated by MTI leadership. So there again, comes down to a piece of paper.
Yep.
Very easy.
To fake.
Very, very easy to fake. Outcome, declared a Ponzi and a pyramid scheme, and liquidators authorized to claw back funds from net winners. So I also think that's important as well.
Yes, and it's the first time it happened where in the past the early winners, if we can call them that, on the Ponzi's, the one who received money
They always
from,
benefited.
They benefited, but there was no mechanism to get the money back from them. So in this instance, the clawback, and again, it's based on the legal principle of undue enrichment. So in this instance, you should have known better and you should have assumed that it was a Ponzi, and this is now why you're held accountable and you need to pay the money back.
Yeah, well, hopefully people would have opened their eyes to the actual repercussions of this, in seeing there again that as we evolve, things change, and now you're accountable for every single piece of.
But this is the scary bit. So in a Ponzi, you could be the victim and you could lose money, or you could gain something, and the 10% per month or whatever was promised you could receive. But if this thing unfolds and it turns out it was a Ponzi, you can be minus your 10% and you could be forced to pay back the money. So it's almost an evolution and a new problem to Ponzi's, because even if you win, you might lose.
Yeah, I suppose it's good for a portion, and
no, it's good for no one. This is the problem. Everybody loses. And for me, this is the biggest problem with these. I understand the silver lining you're trying to find, but for me,
I have to be optimistic.
I don't want to be, and we shouldn't be optimistic about these things. They shouldn't happen.
Yes, the legal side coming out.
Yeah, no, and I'm getting onto my legal soapbox right now, but I want to live in a world where this isn't possible, where we empower people to know how to protect themselves and everybody against these type of things, and where Ponzi's and pyramids can't function anymore. I know I'm optimistic, but let it go dream.
So back to the actual scheme from 2015 to 2019, formation and the operation. So MTI launched in South Africa as a Bitcoin trading platform. So obviously membership surged globally due to aggressive MLM recruitment. MTI claimed to use AI-powered trading bots to generate daily profits from Bitcoin trading. However, no bots existed, and trades were either fake or misrepresented. It operated as a multi-level marketing scheme, and members earned bonuses for recruiting others, creating a pyramid structure. So
a Ponzi and a pyramid with a little bit of fraud sprinkled over it,
which you possibly couldn't track if you get caught up in the hype of
Bitcoin.
Getting rich quick.
Yes.
In 2020, collapse and exposure. So there again, we know what the period was from 2015 to 2019, where crypto assets were becoming the new craze. In 2020, the scheme began unveiling after the FSCA raised alarms and tech activists Anonymous ZA exposed weaknesses in MTI's website, revealing their company's fraudulent structure.
See, we love a whistleblower.
Yeah, so that obviously is a bit of a touchy subject as well. But Johan Steenberg fled to Brazil, leaving many investors stranded. So I think it's been there again. I mean, you've taken 14 billion and you're able to flee the country.
So 2021 to 2025 legal proceedings. So MTI was placed into final liquidation by the Western Cape High Court. Steenberg was arrested in Brazil for using forged documents. So again, he didn't stop there. And allegedly passed away in Brazil in 2024, if you want to believe that. High Court officially declared MTI a Ponzi and a pyramid scheme. Liquidators recovered 1,200 Bitcoin, about 1 billion rand in Bitcoin. And the court ruled that liquidators can claw back funds from net winners. Like we said, this is again a big change in how the authorities deal with Ponzi schemes or pyramid schemes. And unfortunately, even if you think you were one of the first winners, you won't be a winner for long. And then finally, our most recent Ponzi and pyramid scheme, Tario Mix, or Forever Diamonds and Gold, with Louis Liebenberg as the front. So modus operandi here was he solicited investments from thousands of individuals under the guise of a joint venture to buy and sell diamonds. He promised high returns on diamond packages, or pakkies like he called them in Afrikaans, often advertised via social media. He loved him a little bit of social media. It functioned as a Ponzi because he used new investors' money to pay earlier investors. And the funds were allegedly diverted to personal, and we've read it in the news, also political causes. The outcome was liquidation and criminal charges. The estimated total amount of money lost is 4 billion. So Louis' court case is still ongoing, but if we dive into the detail a little bit, and again, I'm not saying everybody who's actively marketing products are running Ponzi's or pyramids, but the one thing that keeps on popping up is how these scammers actively market and almost aggressively, if we can use the word market, their schemes to the public. And his marketing to the public started around 2019, primarily through social media platforms like Facebook and WhatsApp. So, just look out for those. The marketing strategy including promoting diamond investment packages with promises of high returns, using video messages and live streams from Louis' sort of profiles. And he did it to build trust and almost hype, encouraging people to become JV partners in his diamond deals. And he also leveraged his Afrikaner identity and unity narratives to appeal to a specific community. He had some Afrikaans celebrities involved as well. This public-facing campaign rapidly gained traction, leading to thousands of investors joining the scheme. But by 2023, collapse in exposure. So in Feb 2023, AE Switch, which was the e-wallet platform that he used, froze investor accounts, citing criminal activity and massive withdrawals by Louis. This action sort of cut off access to investor funds, triggering panic and legal action. Multiple investors filed urgent applications in court after they didn't receive their promised payouts. And by April 2023, the High Court granted provisional liquidation, which was later made a final order in April 2024. So, you can see in the news, Louis' case is still pending. Him and his associates were charged with 42 counts of fraud, racketeering and money laundering, so FICA popping up again, involving over 4 billion rand. And then, worse than this, the use of illicitly sourced Zama diamonds and misappropriation of funds, including political donations, added to the scandal. So like I mentioned, his case is still pending, so watch the space.
Yeah, it's going to be quite interesting to see what the outcome is, including the actual recourse of how we're going to actually recover or recoup the funds.
Well, for me, it's also interesting to see if the same principle that popped up in the MTI case, where they actually use the clawback principle to get money back from the early winners, will be used here too, because again, there were a lot of people who made money out of this. So I think they're sitting and waiting to see if the same principle will be applied. But now I want to move on to almost the positive of this. I'm feeling a little bit frustrated and irritated after all of those depressing facts. But the point of today is almost to help you to firstly identify the trends in the scams, but also to enable you to protect yourself and your clients. And this can be done by firstly just doing a proper due diligence. So I know it's almost after FICA, a lot of people's other favorite word, or some see it as a waste of time. But it's important because you have to verify the credentials and background of all the parties involved in an investment scheme. And there's a lot of places you can do it. So you can verify the scheme with the FSCA. It's a quick search on the website. They even list it by product. Check if they licensed or regulated by the SOB, the NCR, or the NCC. You can verify the directors and advisors either against the CIPC website or the FSCA website. In today's day and age and social media, it's easy to check qualifications and experience. People have trials. I mean, even just going to LinkedIn and checking if the person exists there. And then also check disciplinary history or prior involvement in failed schemes. So again, adverse media is an important thing to check too. If somebody has been involved in a previous type of scheme, or there is a little bit of bad press out there, usually when there's smoke, there's fire, and then the red flags start to pop up. Another important thing is you need to understand the investment strategy. So when people use big words or
fancy
crazy,
words.
Big words, fancy words, things you can't pronounce or you have to Google to understand, then there's a problem. So also ask yourself, what are the underlying assets, and do you know how they work, and do you understand how they work? How are returns generated? Is there a track record of performance? And try and avoid schemes that rely on recruiting new investors. So the moment you get rewarded for recruiting people, the pyramid structure red flags sort of need to pop up. And also be careful for buzzwords like AI powered or blockchain and all of these things without substance. The most important bit of the due diligence is that you need to request and review information. So if it's an investment prospectus or a fund fact sheet or financial statements, and if people don't want to give you those pieces of information, another red flag. But also be cautious, because if the documents are vague or misleading or overly technical without clear explanations, it's also one of those things people do to try and almost drown you in information, and then you stop asking questions. More due diligence is confirm payment channels. So only use verified banking details, and if you can verify it on the provider's website, even better. Try and avoid payments via cryptocurrency. So the moment somebody asks you to pay fees in crypto, sort of red flags, or cash or even third-party accounts, and be very cautious if you're requested to upfront fees without any documentation. So
Yeah, we've seen a few of those as well.
exactly, red flags everywhere. Then assess the communication and sales tactics. So red flags here include people trying to almost get to you via social media. So unsolicited offers via WhatsApp or email or social media. Pressure to act quickly. So if people start to say it's a limited time offer, then let the time go. So if it is such a good idea, it probably will make a return. Or if people start to say it's exclusive opportunities and if they combine it and say it's a limited time offer, exclusive opportunity only available to certain people, then it's double the red flags.
Yeah, but I suppose also like underlying structure, track record, company time, it's not limited to only those words. But I mean, like if you go onto a website and if you actually track the existence of a company, that should also be in addition to this as well when you're looking at these words.
But again, it's so I'm not saying when there's like limited product lifespans that it's a Ponzi. But when it's usually the more red flags you see, then the scale starts to tip. It's also when people promise guarantees of high returns and almost impossible things, like if you can triple your money in 6 months. Again, if you could triple, and you mentioned it earlier, if it was possible to triple your money in 6 months, we would not have a single poor person in this entire world. So again, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. And then some of them also use fear-based messaging. So when they say traditional investments are unsafe, but now you can put all your pension money in Bitcoin and not lose it. So it's those type of things. When people start to almost play on your emotions and try and scare you into things, or sort of, try and persuade you to do something.
Yeah.
If an investment's so good, then usually it sells itself. So people don't need to use sales tactics on it too. And I don't want to overly simplify it, but if you can ask 3 important questions, then a lot of the DD work will be done. So the first question is, does it sound too good to be true? And if your short answer is yes, then walk away. If your answer is no, then ask the other questions. And if you're in the maybe space, then maybe you should walk away too. The next question is the structure transparent? And again, if people use big words, if they hide behind big words or fancy things, then be a little bit more cautious. And then lastly, is the investment protected? So, and protection here doesn't mean that they say it's low risk, but protection as in, is it regulated? Is there a fallback? So to almost visually represent this, the investment needs to be realistic, safe, and transparent. If you're comfortable that it is, then proceed. If you're not sure, then ask more questions or maybe just walk away. So if we unpack the first question, does it sound too good to be true? Are the returns realistic and aligned with market norms? Are there guarantees of very high returns with little or no risk? Again, remember that's a massive red flag. And then are returns paid out even when the underlying investment performs poorly? And again, if it does, then you need to ask questions, because usually your returns are linked to the underlying investment's performance. More questions here is, are returns based on actual investments or products? And are you required to recruit new investor funds? Again, red flags. Are there signs of unsustainable returns? And then are their testimonials or success stories verifiable and not exaggerated? So if you have that friends or family little video saying, I got 6 million rand back after 2 seconds of investment, just ask them questions. Next one is the structure transparent. Is the business model clearly explained and documented? So again, explained in a way that makes sense within our regulatory framework. Are audited financial statements available? Is the marketing material clear, honest, and not misleading? And are payments made to promoters without proper documentation? So again, they shouldn't ask you for any payments until the investment's properly set up. So if you need to pay these initiation fees or those type of things, just big red flags. More questions here. Is the scheme structured like a stokvel but lacks transparency or governance? So again, I'm not saying stokvels are bad, but we've seen that structure being abused a lot, so the regulators are stepping up there to help. Are there membership tiers, bonuses, or incentives for recruitment? Again, that's a red flag. And another massive red flag is the scheme promoted via social media or encrypted platforms. So again, I'm not saying that if you talk to your client via WhatsApp that you're a scammer now, but if the sole mechanism for promotion is social media, then that should be a big, big red flag. Then lastly, is the investment protected? So is the investment structure licensed? So again, I'm not saying licensed structures means that it's legitimate. We've seen some licensed structures fail in the past, even listed ones. But licensing just adds another layer of safety because there's more rules and regulation. There are additional regulatory eyes upon the structure. Are all the entities authorized to provide the specific financial product or service? And then have any individuals been debarred before? Which again, I don't have to go too much into that, but you know what happens when you get debarred. So debarment as a rule means that ask more questions. Is there a history of insolvency or asset forfeiture linked to the scheme? Again, you don't want anybody who's been declared insolvent in the past to run your new investment scheme. Is there a board of directors or trustees with fiduciary responsibility? So again, in the evolving regulatory framework, the Trust Property Control Act, the Companies Act, all of those changes have placed enhanced fiduciary responsibilities on these people. So make sure they understand the responsibilities. And are there internal controls and risk management policies and processes in place? So again, all of these things add, again, if they say it's low risk, then prove it. So is this a low risk product? Wonderful. Explain your risk management policies and processes to me, but in a way that makes sense. So this is almost the way you catch them out. So, oh, you say it's low risk? Explain to me how. And if they start to and or they have no clue, then let
So
the
you
red
have to throw
flags pop up.
RMCP in there as well.
I didn't, you did, but I'm glad to see where your brain is. So, more sort of protection mechanisms is, you understand, and it's a TCF thing too, but there needs to be complaints resolution mechanisms in place. And almost understand it before you get to a point where you have to complain. Are TCF principles embedded in the operations? And then are they in the indication of money laundering or fraudulent activity? So in summary, if you think about it, investment scams exist because scammers find a way to exploit greed and gullibility. And there's usually a degree of overlap between general fraud, Ponzi, and pyramid schemes. So in some of these instances in the case studies we did, you could see like all three of those were present. Some modern examples include online trading scams linked to forex or cryptocurrency trading platforms, with people holding themselves out as expert advisors. And it's also frequently advertised or promoted via social media. So again, if you see these type of things, let the red flags pop up. I'm not saying all online platforms or cryptocurrency dealers are scammers. And I mean, even cryptocurrency dealers are accountable institutions now. So there's enhanced regulation. But these are unfortunately just the products being exploited by these scammers or fraudsters. So you need to be cognizant of that.
Yeah, so I suppose as well, when it comes to these mechanisms of social media advertisements, there's specific places where these schemes tend to advertise. So, I mean, if it's coming through legitimate sources which are paid for, which are coming through different platforms, and not just a simple WhatsApp message or...
I think it's the unsolicitation. So if you get random WhatsApps and you didn't ask for it, then...
More along that line?
See that as a red flag. But if somebody has a social media presence, it's not necessarily a bad thing, because that's the way the world is evolving. So again, it's difficult not to go to the extremes and say everybody on social media, or if you have a TikTok, you've got a problem now. I mean, we even ventured into YouTube with these videos, but again, it's almost the intent behind it. So are they using it to solicit sort of investors into their fraudulent things, or the entities using social media potentially for upliftment or enablement?
Okay.
And then again, it might sound simple, but you can really protect yourself and your clients by just performing proper due diligence. And remember, if you ask those three important questions, but ultimately, if you are convinced that the investment's realistic, safe, and transparent, then you've got nothing to worry about. But you can only feel comfortable after you've done the due diligence, after you've asked the questions, and after you've eliminated all of the red flags. But to leave you with a little reminder, if somebody offers you impossible guaranteed returns, zero risk, or even a private jet by next December, you have to ask yourself some questions. So just ask yourself, is this a believable investment opportunity, or are you potentially 3 WhatsApp messages away from falling for a Ponzi or some sort of scam? But we hope that you stay sharp, stay skeptical, and may you only see pyramids in Egypt and not in your investment portfolio.